Thanks so much, everyone, for coming today, and really grateful for all of our panelists, and excited to be here today talking about such an important issue that I know has affected such a long, has affected our state for such a long time and in such deep ways. Today, I am joined by Wendell, the Executive Director of Texas Watch. Thanks, Ware, for being here. Jay Blazek-Crossley is the Executive Director of Farm and City. Thank you so much. Kathy Sokolic is the co-chair and co-founder, I believe, of Central Texas Families for Safe Streets. And finally, we're joined by Harry Adler, who is with the Institute for Safer Trucking. So we've got a pretty star-studded cast here today. And as I mentioned to the attendees, if y'all are interested, we do have the Q&A function available today. So if you have questions as we're moving along, go and put them in chat, and I'll try and moderate them to our panelists as soon as it seems appropriate. Otherwise, we'll take all questions at the end, if that makes more sense. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, who's going to get us started talking about what is happening in the legislature to make our streets safer.
All right, well, thanks so much, Bay, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Jay Blazek-Crossley. I'm Executive Director of Farm and City, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit that works on Texas public policy at the intersections of transportation, urban planning, sustainability, and equity. But for today's purpose, our biggest project is Vision Zero Texas, where we work with the state government and local and regional governments to end traffic deaths statewide. Part of why we work on this is that Texas leads the nation in traffic deaths. And on the average day in Texas, 10 people die, 10 families lose a loved one every day because of the way the Texas transportation system works. And another 50 people suffer incapacitating injuries, lifelong things like brain damage or loss of a limb. And so we believe Texas can instead lead the nation in ending traffic deaths. And actually, towards that goal, TxDOT 2 years ago adopted a system safety approach, and the Texas Transportation Commission adopted a goal to cut traffic deaths in half statewide by 2035 and to end traffic deaths by 2050. And local and regional governments are also adopting such goals and working with TxDOT to figure out how we can end traffic deaths. But traffic deaths, like, not only are horrible for our families and for the people of Texas, they cost a lot. It's a really big problem. And if you use the National Safety Council methodology for figuring out how much traffic deaths are costing us, statewide in 2020, the total estimated economic cost of traffic crashes in Texas was $27 billion, about twice as big of a problem as the estimated cost of congestion, for example. And about more than twice as much as we actually spend on building roads is the cost of crashes. And so we're trying to change this and work with TxDOT and the legislature to pass laws that actually will save lives and give us all safe options. We have a Vision Zero Texas legislative agenda, and I'll post now in the chat links to our legislative agenda and a couple other documents, one referring to how I calculated that cost of crashes. And at this point in the session, some of the safety bills are actually moving, and we're very optimistic that the legislature may actually take some positive actions on safety. I'll mention a couple bills. House Bill 442 is the Safe Neighborhood Streets Bill, which would actually just make it easier for cities and city traffic engineers to set lower speed limits on residential streets, on little 2-lane streets. If you look at just kids who were hurt or killed while walking or biking in Texas, most of them were hurt or killed on 30-mile-an-hour streets, these little streets. And instead, I want a future where kids can live like I grew up in the early 80s, walking and biking and riding their skateboard around their neighborhood without being afraid of being killed. Then House Bill 443 is the Stop for Pedestrians bill, and we have a distinct pedestrian safety crisis in Texas, and this bill would not change any of the places where a pedestrian has the right of way, but would simply have all of us, when we're driving, stop and yield to the pedestrian instead of trying to roll through and hoping we don't hit somebody. And then those two bills are in calendars, and we hope they'll have a floor vote this week or next. The crash not accident bill, House Bill 3325, was actually passed by the Texas House last Friday. And we hope that this coming week that'll be taken up by the Senate, and we hope that bill will go through. And the point is that these aren't accidents. People make decisions. People decide to drive drunk. People decide to look at their phone while they should be driving. And we, as the public and elected officials and decision makers, make decisions about our transportation system that cause crashes. And so we should not refer to them incorrectly as accidents. And finally, we're working very hard on a consistent statewide hands-free bill. SB 42, we believe, is the single bill that the legislature has in front of it this year that would save the most lives this year if passed. And we're still hoping for a hearing. We're working with Senator Chair Hughes to get a hearing for that bill. And so that's some of the stuff and there's some other safety bills that are moving along. But that I did want to focus a little bit on commercial vehicle crashes and using the same methodology as before. If you look at just commercial vehicle crashes in Texas, over 100,000 people last year were involved in a crash involving a commercial vehicle in Texas. And the economic cost of those crashes was $2.5 billion. And there's actually another measure called the comprehensive cost, where you factor in pain and suffering and future years of life lost. And using that measure, commercial vehicle crashes cost almost $15 billion for the people of Texas just last year. And so we think the Texas legislature should work with the governor and TxDOT to dramatically and quickly solve this issue. One of our proposals is that the state of Texas has a goal to end traffic deaths by 2050. Corporations and commercial vehicle carriers, I believe it's incumbent upon them to work faster than the general public. And so I believe the state of Texas should have a goal to end commercial vehicle traffic deaths sooner. And we're proposing by 2040. And I've been involved in the Texas Strategic Highway Safety Plan since 2017. And this year, TxDOT and other partners will be developing another iteration of this plan. And I've probably given hundreds of hours to this plan. And so I'm calling upon all of our commercial vehicle carriers and corporations to invest at least as much time as I have in that process. And we should have a commercial vehicle death reduction element to our strategic highway safety plan. And we should work together to develop bills that the legislature can pass to reduce these deaths. And I believe that these bills that are bills, all of them, safe neighborhood streets, stop for pedestrians, hands-free, would lessen commercial vehicle deaths. And there's some other key things that we could do, such as requiring rear and side guards, and automated speed enforcement. And then finally, there's expressways like SH-130 that's meant as a truck bypass of Austin, but unfortunately was designed for 85 miles an hour with the highest speed limit in America. So many commercial vehicle companies actually avoid that toll road because they know it's not safe. And so part of what we need to do to make it safe for commercial vehicle drivers and the rest of us is safe speed limits and safe speeds on what are intended as our freight routes. And so I hope that all of you can work with us to work with the legislature to find solutions so that less Texans are killed by all these crashes in future years. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Jay. It's a great overview and agree completely. Harry, I think you're up next for us, and you've got a little screen sharing situation here, so we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I'll go ahead and share that screen. And yeah, so thank you all so much for having me. I'm from the Institute for Safer Trucking. My name is Harry Adler, and we are a 501c3. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we work, in all 50 states to provide information and support to folks who survive truck crashes or lost loved ones in truck crashes. and help them after that process. Uh, um, and we also work to educate the public about ways to make trucking safer. And one of the ways we do that is by bringing together the different stakeholders. So the folks who have been adversely affected, people in the trucking industry, truck drivers, government regulators and lawmakers. And so we want to bring everyone together and talk about ways we can make the road safer. We obviously prefer doing it when we're talking about different solutions to safety, as opposed to talking about why a bill would actually be bad for safety. And that's what I'm going to do a little bit about, just talk about why HB 19 and SB 17 really will diminish safety in Texas. And then we'll also offer up some solutions that can really elevate safety. So, truck safety has been getting worse throughout the country over the last decade. Truck crash deaths are up 48%. But if you look at the numbers in Texas, they've gone up 105%. And so it's really startling, especially when you consider this far outpaced, the rate at which Texas's population grew. So, the roads are getting less safe, and it's not just for, the folks who are in passenger vehicles, on bikes, and pedestrians. We also looked at the number of truck drivers killed, and while that number is up 77% nationally, in Texas, it's up 140%. And so, thinking about a truck driver who might be killed in a crash with another truck driver, they're also going to be adversely affected by, bills like HB 19 and SB 17. And part of why that is because this bill will shift accountability away from large companies and, for things that really fall under the umbrella of corporate negligence. And in doing so, it's going to shift the blame to, solely the driver. And what happens here is this is going to create a race to the bottom, because it removes a really important form of accountability, which is our legal system, where people can go and say, I was wronged by this company that had a duty to, do X, Y, and Z. And in this case, it's a very simple X, Y, and Z. It's to operate safely on the roads. And they violated that. And in doing so, they harmed my loved one, they harmed me. And so without that accountability, the safe companies that we see investing in safety technologies start to say, is it worth it? I'm competing against this company that is spending, several $100 less or thousands of dollars less on safety technology or training. And so I can't compete with their rates. And, now that this bill might get passed, maybe it's not so important for me to invest in these really important safety solutions. And so, we start to see that this has just a larger effect than saying we're going to, one, make it more difficult for families to hold companies accountable. But then two, it starts to then put the question to the safe companies, really, what's the point of trying to be safe if there's no accountability for it? So we really think these are a big problem, especially when you consider this protects a lot of big companies that aren't in Texas. If you look at the top 100 trucking companies in the country, only 2 of them are in Texas. So when you really start to ask, who is this bill for? It's for companies that drive through Texas roads. But if they happen to harm Texans, well, they don't want to be held so accountable for that and for things they did as a company. So we really need to think why we're doing this bill, but it's certainly not to improve safety. And in fact, it will probably diminish safety even more. And so when you look at things that, the Texas legislature could actually focus on, Jay mentioned speed limits, and he's completely right. You look at the data, and truck crash fatalities have gotten way worse on roads that have speed limits of 75 miles an hour or more. And when we did our analysis, we went back and looked at the data back to 2012. In 2011 and 2012, Texas, those are the years when Texas raised a lot of their speed limits from 70 or 65 to 75 or 80. And I mean, you can just see here that it went from 79 deaths to 171. I mean, that's a massive increase, 116%. And that's compared to a 3% decrease on roads that had 70 miles an hour or less. So all of the reductions in fatalities that we saw on the roads that have more reasonable speed limits absolutely wiped away by the sheer increase in people killed on these higher speed limited roads. So addressing speeding is really important, and there's actually some great data from Texas A&M that really underscores this. I mean, they looked at 2,800 commercial motor vehicle crashes across 20 different counties in Texas. Speeding was one of the driving behaviors that had the most impact on CMV being at fault. And when speed was a factor, we see that costs are higher, and we see that injury and fatality risks are way higher. And so looking at speed limits, seeing, do we need to have 75, 80 mile an hour speed limits? And how is that affecting truck safety? Because just based on this top line data, it's trending in the wrong direction. So addressing speed limits, lowering them is a really great solution at the state level. Obviously at the federal level, we're hoping that there's regulations that are promulgated to require the use of speed limiters that are already in trucks. Just to note, most trucks have been built with speed limiters since the late 1990s. So it's a matter of having that technology set or not. So that's something that can happen at the federal level. Another issue that really requires attention, not just in Texas, but in really a lot of states, is just improving the training to become a commercial motor vehicle operator. When you think about getting licensed, whether it's for real estate or being a barber, there are hour requirements to ensure that you actually know what you're doing. And unfortunately in Texas, if you can pass the test, there are no minimum hour requirements in terms of showing what you need to do when you're operating a commercial motor vehicle. And that's a problem. One of the things we see is that there's just not proficient entry-level driver training throughout the industry. And so in order to prevent against that, or in really bad situations, things known as CDL mills, which effectively just make a lot of money giving people, getting people licenses who really aren't qualified to have them. These kinds of things prevent against that. A minimum number of hours prevent against that. And so, it's important that the legislature look at requiring a certain number of behind the wheel hours, as well as classroom hours for becoming a truck driver. And then also, one last thing we'll talk about is work zone crashes. It's a really bad problem nationally. We know that 1 out of every 3 fatal work zone crashes involves a truck. But the problem's even worse in Texas. It's 35%. And when you look nationally at fatal work zone crashes involving a large truck, 1 out of every 5 happens in Texas. So we really need to be doing a lot better to prevent these fatal work zone crashes. And one of the ways you do that is having better enforcement to make sure that folks' brakes are working adequately. And at the federal level, one of the things we're working on is trying to get automatic emergency braking in these large trucks. Trucks that have electronic stability control, these large truck tractors, they're primed for having automatic emergency braking. And the federal agencies that oversee traffic safety should be moving immediately on that. So these are just 3 of the solutions we think that could really elevate safety and improve accountability rather than diminish it, which is ultimately what's happening with House Bill 19 and Senate Bill 17. So, just to reiterate again, reducing those speed limits for large trucks, increasing the minimum number of hours required to be a truck driver, and doing more to prevent distracted driving, and really upping, commercial motor vehicle enforcement to prevent against, again, things like a truck not being well lit or their brakes not working adequately, and then it resulting in a work zone crash. And one thing that's not on here, but I'll just add it real quickly since Jay had mentioned it, at the state level, Texas could do, a little more on underride, and a really great starting point would be having a field on your post a police accident report that actually indicates if an underride crash occurred. It's not present in a lot of states, and it's something that, if you got on there, would really help with data collection efforts to shine a light on just how prevalent these underride crashes are, because we know from a report recently from the GAO, they're undercounted. So, that's something Texas could do, again, at the state level, while also, folks support at the federal level the Stop Underrides Act. So there's stuff that you can do in state, there's stuff that can happen federally. And ultimately, if you have any more questions about it, please reach out to the Institute for Safer Trucking. We can answer any questions on any of the statistics that we provided, as well as any of the solutions. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to Bay. Thanks.
Thanks, Harry. I appreciate that. So we've heard from Jay about what TxDOT needs to do to make our state safer. Now we've heard from Harry about everything going on in the commercial vehicle space and what needs to happen both here and federally. And so now I want to dive a little bit deeper into House Bill 19, which is complicated enough that I had to bring in a cleanup hitter here. So Ware, can you back clean up here and talk to us a little bit more about the jurisprudence angle of HB 19 and why exactly that is making our streets more dangerous if it were to pass?
Most definitely. Thank you, Bay. Thank you, TexPIRG, for organizing this event. Thank you to all the panelists. We have some of the top experts in the country on this call, and I'm more than happy to talk about the bill. My name is Wendell. I'm the executive director of Texas Watch. For over 20 years, Texas Watch has worked on issues related to safety, accountability, and justice at the Texas Capitol. We exist to engage the public in the fight for their rights at the Texas Capitol. As you've heard from both Jay and from Harry, we have a safety crisis on our roads here in Texas. There's a clear and present danger that our families face each and every day on our roads, whether it's our highways or our neighborhood streets. House Bill 19 is a bill that's being carried by Representative Jeff Leach out of Plano. It's being pushed hard by the trucking industry and the corporate lobbyist at Texans for Lawsuit Reform. The bill is up for debate in the House tomorrow. It's set on the Thursday calendar. So I encourage everybody watching this call to go to Texas Legislature online and pull up the text of the bill. Again, it's House Bill 19 by Representative Jeff Leach. Let me break down the bill and what it does. All of those great safety measures that Harry just spoke about, things that we can be doing to make our trucks safer in the state, none of that is included in this bill. We explicitly asked the committee to include those safety measures in the bill. Everything was frankly disregarded and discounted and rejected. Instead, what we have in House Bill 19 is a bill with exceptionally broad application. We at Texas Watch have been talking a lot about the threat posed by large trucks, and I'll get into that here in just a minute. But I think the first thing for the audience to understand is the bill has a very broad definition in it for commercial vehicles. So yes, it applies to 18-wheelers, it applies to heavy trucks, but it also applies to delivery vans. I mean, think of the Amazon delivery van circling your neighborhood each day, delivering packages. If they run the stop sign and hit you while you're walking the dog in your neighborhood, this bill and its special protections for wrongdoers is going to apply to them. Yes, it applies if you're on I-35 and you get boxed in by big rigs and they run you off the road or crash into you. So it's 18 wheels, it's 4 wheels, Uber drivers who hit you, Lyft drivers, all commercial vehicles are covered in this bill. We see that there's no reason for this bill at all because it's only going to make our roads more dangerous. It does nothing to improve safety. I'm going to press on and touch on really 2 parts of the bill. So if you've got the bill in front of you, or if you're going to look at it here in a little bit, look at 72.054. That's a new section that would be added to our law. 72.054 gets at the question of corporate negligence. Right now, under our law, if a corporation is negligent, you can bring that evidence before the court. You can put that in front of the jury. You can show them everything that that corporation did wrong, whether it was negligent hiring or negligent supervision of their drivers. All of that information, if it's relevant and admissible, and that's the judge's job to figure out what should go to the jury. But if it's relevant and admissible, the jury's going to have a complete picture of the wrongdoing. Why is that important? Because they need to know all the events that led up to the crash, not just the 3 seconds before the crash, but the full picture, right? What's happening inside of this corporation to create these conditions, to put this overworked driver in that position in that moment on that road when they hit this person? What's the culture within that organization? It's important for the families who are impacted because through our civil justice system, they get to learn about the wrongdoing. They get answers as to how this happened, why it happened, and not just what happened. So the bill instead narrows the scope and the focus way down. A lot of that corporate negligence is off the table. It's out of the picture for the jury. They don't get to hear about corporate negligence. There's no reason to do that in our view. Instead, the corporations can essentially hide behind their driver. They can point their finger at their driver. They can scapegoat their driver, if you will, by making the stipulation. And stipulation is a fancy lawyer word for they could admit that, yes, this is our driver, and yes, he was on the job. And if they make that admission, if they make that stipulation, now the attention when it comes to negligence is basically focused on what that driver did in the seconds before the crash. Did he or she swerve? Did they hit the brakes too late? And it really just becomes a question for the jury of driver A versus driver B. And this is a much bigger issue. Again, there are systems failures that often lead to these catastrophic crashes. And over 600 Texans a year die on our roads from these large truck crashes. We are #1 in the country. We don't want to be leading the country here, but we do, and we have for years. We have more large truck crashes in Texas than all of the combined states, all the surrounding states combined, more than California, more than Florida by orders of magnitude. We have the most dangerous, the most deadly roads in the country when it comes to large trucks. So it narrows the focus on the driver. The corporation's negligence is basically taken out of the picture. And you can predict what that means then for the jury. They don't get to evaluate that, so they don't get to assess that. And that runs counter to our current law, which says that every party's responsibilities should be considered and weighed and apportioned by the court. That makes sense. Whether you've got 2 plaintiffs and 3 defendants, or 1 plaintiff and 2 defendants, or whatever it is, they get to look at everybody and figure out who was at fault. How much is the plaintiff at fault? How much is each of these defendants at fault? That gets changed in this bill, and it's going to hurt the public. The second thing that the bill does, if you look at 72052, section 72052 of the bill, is it splits the trial into 2 phases. Again, the fancy lawyer word here for that is bifurcates the trial, but just think of it as 2 trials instead of 1. Phase 1 will be the driver's negligence once the corporation makes that stipulation that we talked about. Yes, that's our driver. Yes, he was on the job. Now we're just focusing on the driver, basically. And then if you get through phase 1, now you can talk in phase 2 about gross negligence. Gross negligence is an exceptionally high bar to clear under Texas law. For those of you in the press or lawmakers who are watching this webinar, you can go to the Civil Practices and Remedies Code. It's in section 41, 001 and 003 of the Civil Practice and Remedies Code. Everybody can find that on Texas Legislature online as well. But you'll see there that that gross negligence, and here we're talking about corporations and their gross negligence. You have to prove 2 things that are really hard to prove. Number 1, conscious indifference. And then number 2, to an extreme risk of harm. So you almost have to show intent. They have to know this stuff is super dangerous and they ignored it. They were consciously indifferent to it. And then you have to prove that by clear and convincing evidence, which is a much higher standard than the standard for ordinary or regular negligence, which is preponderance of the evidence. You can think of that as 51 to 49, just more likely than not that the wrongdoer committed these actions. Clear and convincing is much higher than that. So it's exceptionally hard to prove gross negligence. It's very rare that you can prove gross negligence because you have to have evidence of just egregious, the worst conduct you can imagine to get there. So the jury is going to be confused. I mean, they're going to be asking, hey, why did we hear about all this bad stuff at the beginning of the trial? They're going to have to be reminded about what happened in the first trial, if you will, and it wastes judicial resources. I mean, today you have one trial and you talk about all the wrongdoing, and then the jury answers a series of legal questions as to who did what wrong and how the damages should be assessed. So this is taken out of the hands of the judge. It's not at their discretion. Any defendant can make this election, and the court shall order a bifurcation or splitting of the trial. Confuses the jury, wastes the court's time. The trucking companies are complaining about their insurance rates going up. And look, their insurance rates may be going up. And the reason why is because of everything that Harry just told you, because they're maiming and killing more and more Texans each year on our roads. My answer to them is, if you want to lower your insurance rates, and I understand that, stop maiming and killing so many people. Take safety seriously. Put speed limiters on your trucks. Train your drivers. Maintain your vehicles. Clean up your own act. Don't go to the Texas Capitol and ask for and demand special protections for special interests, which is what they're doing. They want special privileges under the law. And we believe that everyone should live according to the same laws. No one is above or below the laws. We believe in equal justice under the law. House Bill 19, if it passes, I'm very concerned that it's going to lead to more death and destruction on our roads. The reason why is our courts are there to do two things primarily. Number one, compensate injured parties, right? That's the balancing of the scales of justice. And that helps all of us as taxpayers, because now the costs are being borne by the wrongdoers and not by you and me, when people now have to seek care, uncompensated care in ERs and county hospitals under charity care. You and I pick up the tab as taxpayers if the wrongdoers don't pay for it directly. So that's the first, compensation. But number two, and people forget this, and I think it's the most important thing, is deterrence. Our laws are rules. They are the rules of the road. They're codes of conduct. It's how we keep one another safe. It's the agreement that we all enter into when we get on the roads and we share the roads with one another. And if you lessen our laws, if you lessen the liability for wrongdoers, then you're only going to create a more dangerous situation. And that's going to lead to more death because the incentives have been changed. And as you heard earlier, the companies who are doing it the right way, and some companies do, and we thank them, the ones who are investing in training and are really supervising their drivers and are maintaining their trucks, they're now put at a competitive disadvantage. Corners will be cut, lives will be lost. There will be a race to the bottom. You can learn more at texaswatch.org/safe roads. We have a lot of fact sheets up there, a lot of videos profiling people, families who've been devastated in these wrecks, a lot of the media coverage we're grouping there for lawmakers to learn about the issue. So again, texaswatch.org/safe roads. And if you want to tell your lawmaker to oppose this bill, and we hope that you will, it only takes a second to do it on our website, texaswatch.org/trucking danger. Again, texaswatch.org/trucking danger. You don't have to know who your rep or your senator is. Just enter your name and your address, and our system will get you to your rep, your state senator, and send a letter to the governor telling them to oppose House Bill 19 because it will lead to more loss of life on our roads. Thank you, Bay.
Thanks, Ware, for that deep dive into that. And I think I learned quite a bit myself. As from an economist perspective, from my perspective, it just creates all the wrong incentives like you're talking about. One of the true truths, one of the foundations of economics is that people and firms respond to incentives. So let's give them the right incentives and let's not create strange mal incentives to be able to do wrongdoing on the roads. I also should have known better to myself to try and keep brilliant and passionate people to a 5-minute timeline. There was no chance that was ever happening. I am as naive as they say. Nonetheless, we are getting close, and I did a lot 45 minutes, so we've still got a little bit of time. I want to introduce Kathy Sokolic, who is co-founder and chair of the Central Texas Families for Safe Streets, who can tell us a little bit more. Now that we've dove into the wonkosphere, we can talk a little bit more about how this affects families and why it's so important.
Thanks so much, Bay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. And it's really an honor to be with these other folks who are so passionate about these issues. I joined this work in 2016 when my 9-year-old nephew was hit by a pickup truck in front of his house. And he was one of those incapacitated here in Texas. and he requires 24-hour care. He can't eat on his own. He can't drink. He can't pee on his own. The kid can't move. And it's been 4.5 years, and that is how my family lives, and that is what my family lives with every day. And all this other talk, I mean, I could have taken a nap, no offense, guys, through some of this, because I don't care. What we need to remember is that these are people. These aren't just numbers. We are just one family and in one community that was affected. When we go over to my in-laws' house to visit them, it's awful. Ben is always sick, or he needs special care. We can't even really hang out with our in-laws because they're always caring for Ben, and that is our life, and that is it forever, until something changes. And I think what we really need to remember is that all of these crashes can be prevented. We can end these traffic deaths, regardless of the situation. I think somebody mentioned that everybody makes a decision when they get in a vehicle. I've had people tell me that they're really great at texting while they drive, or using their phone, or they're always posting Instagrams while they're driving. Guess what? That's so cool until you run somebody over. And then you not only have to live with that guilt of impacting a family, but then that family has to live with it and the loss. And I was with another family member yesterday who lost her mother while her mother was in a crosswalk with the right-of-way and was hit by a car. Grief is not a linear process. There's not just 9 stages of grief that you go through and boom, you're done, you're healed. Grief comes at really strange times. Grief affects everyone differently. Every family grieves differently. And some have different financial costs. For instance, my family requires this 24-hour care, which is very expensive. And other costs might be different for different families. We chose not to sue the person that hit my nephew. So all that financial burden is on the family. And it's just so important to remember that this could happen to anyone at any time. You are not immune. I know this seems like something that can't happen to you, but think about all of your friends and how many people you know and how many people who have been impacted by traffic crashes. Either they've been in one themselves, even if they just popped a curb and hit a barrier or something, how scary that is. Add an incapacitating injury or a death into that, or if you had killed somebody else. It's things that we can change. And, like our family will forever be changed. The PTSD from having ambulances come to our street, or seeing a Lifeline helicopter going to the children's hospital, those take on completely different meaning now, and they will forever. So just remember that all of these numbers and all of these dollars that everybody mentioned today, these are human beings. These are lives. These are people who are loved. They could be your family members, and maybe they were. So I just really appreciate you having me here, Bay, to really drive home that point and how important it is to us.
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, I'm going to say a couple quick things, but I just want to note for attendees, now would be the time. If you had some questions, some follow-up questions that you wanted to have answered, now would be the time to put them in chat. Kathy, I too, my mom actually was hit by a driver when she was legally in her car driving, and I don't know if the kids, I think, were racing or something, but it was a sad day, and I was in college and had to come home, and but luckily she's fine now, she's good now. And there's a pretty incredible story about a family in Plano that a couple that was doctors. The husband was a neurosurgeon, and they decided, this was the day of the Super Bowl, and it was about 15 minutes after the Super Bowl started, and they decided, for no apparent reason, to go for a drive about 30 minutes away from their house. They were literally on a joyride. And for the first time in the history of their lives, they decided to stop. And them being there is really the only reason that my mom is still here today. So tough not to think about some providence there. But nonetheless, the point that you make remains the same, that we can talk about these policies in really stark terms, but it's really about the people. So, and seeing no questions there, I will open it up. Any panelists have any last things that they are just dying to get out? Go for it.
Bay, I think it's important for everyone to know that this is a very organized and very well-funded lobbying effort pushing House Bill 19, the trucking danger bill. And the Capitol is not like it is most sessions because of the pandemic, frankly. Yes, you can get into the Capitol. I'm there each week, but it's not like what we all know working other sessions. So it's really important for the public to make their voices heard inside of the Capitol, especially this session where lobbyists are the ones walking the halls right now. So if you are concerned about House Bill 19, and we certainly are at Texas Watch, it's so important for people to take a minute, make a phone call to your state rep or your senator. We have a way to do that on our website, or send them an email. They need to hear from you right now because they're hearing so much from corporate lobbyists right now trying to push this bill through the House. So to Kathy's point, and she could not be more right, this is about the people of this state. And this is about the families who will be devastated in the future if this bill passes. And we have to keep the lawmakers' attention and focused, trained on their constituents, frankly, the people who sent them to Austin, not the corporate lobbyists, but the people who actually elected them, whom they actually represent, whom they actually work for, so that other families are not faced with what Kathy's family is faced with right now. So they need to hear from the public, and they need to hear from them now because the bill's being debated up on the House floor tomorrow.
Cool, thank you, Ware. And I will second that and say that after 50 years of advocacy, TexPIRG knows firsthand that the only way to beat moneyed interests is with people interests, and people power is the only solution for the public interest. So, so thanks again to Ware, to Jay, to Harry, to Kathy. I'm really grateful for all y'all being here. And we will have a recording available for this if you so choose, but otherwise we'll wrap it up there and call it a day.